Thank you, Chair. My paper is titled Composition of the Army Then and Now. Introduction. There is a different order of priority in the type or hierarchy of troops from that in the Arthashastra when compared with the Chola army of South India. South India also had well-established system of military academies. Allocation of troops to tasks demands a good understanding of troop characteristics and capabilities. Extracting sutras from the text as it relates to forest troops can help conceptualize some unique operational or tactical ideas from Arthashastra. From text, a similar narrative can be seen, and the paper discusses the professional need to know the troops, which is a necessity today. Composition of the army. The Mauryan Empire is known to have a large standing army, nearly 6 lakh troops. In Kautilya's explanation, troop composition of various classes in Book 9, Chapter 2 are Maulabala, that is hereditary or standing army, Bhrattabala, the hired or recruited locally for a particular occasion, Shrenibala, the banded or band of soldiers from guilds or mercenaries, Mitrabala, troops of the ally, Amitrabala, that is alien and enemy troops, and finally Atvibala, that is forest troops, tribes such as Sabaras, Pulindas and others. The ancient Chola army of South India is of great interest. In the sixfold army mentioned by Kautilya, the Atavika, that is the foresters and tribesmen, occupy the last position. However, in the case of Chola army of South India, tribesmen are seen to have been integrated into the regular standing army, and some of them rose to high ranks. For example, in the later Chola period, the most prominent were the Maravas, once cattle-lifting marauders. The merchant guild Shreni in Kautilya's list, called Kaikola units, and defectors called Dvaishamabalam. Two units which form from their designation can be seen to be belonging to the Karnataka country and show good methods of inducement by the enemy Cholas to recruit locals from enemy territory for the military labor market. The ruler of Sri Lanka, Mahinda V in AD 1001, is credited to have paid regular wages to the men of Kerala enlisted into his army. The Chola armies had regimental system like the modern army and a highly evolved war machine in its non-material and strategic segments. Training. The Pallavas set up Ghatika to import Vedic and other training. The Ghatikas were the model for the setting up of Salais, as described in the inscription in Kerala, obviously in Malayalam. This Salai was set up as an institution to house Vedic scholars who were also trained in the affairs of military government in the three Rajyas, apparently Chera, Chola and Pandya. The institution of Ghatika seemed to have continued into the Chola period also with the name Tamilized to Kadigai. Due to Kushan invasion of North India in 48 AD, military thinking, theorizing and academies practically disappeared from North India, but continued till Chola period in institution called Ghatikas in Pallava region, Salais, as I said, in Kerala, and after the Chola, they went missing, after the Chola period. Now, the type of Chola army, was it paramilitary or regular? A major characteristics pointed out by historians is that Cholas did not have an institution of a permanent standing army. It was more of a militia. What remains a puzzle is that if we assume the Chola army to be one of the paramilitary or militia model, then what accounts for enduring military success of the Cholas? This is one aspect which now needs more explanation by scholars. Unlike North India, which experienced hordes of invaders over centuries from north and northwest, there was no mass-scale threat of a foreign invasion in South India. Could this be one reason for the South Indian kingdoms not resorting to a standing army as was in the north during the Nandas and the Mauryan period? In absence of a strong regular army, could this be the reason why forest troops were not consigned to the bottom as in the north, as portrayed in the Arthashastra? The institutions of military training, as alluded earlier in South India, also do not appear to be meant for a paramilitary or a temporary army. They appear to indicate an organized regular army with strong institution. Now, the question of types of navy is clearly indicative of an institution which demands professionalism of a regular standing navy. Charles Drickmeyer is correct when he states, I quote, "It appears that the Cholas were the only Indian state to develop a regular navy and make it an effective instrument of military policy. Cholas also undertook the maritime expedition to Southeast Asia with a long-range view of minimizing the role of Srivijaya as the intermediary between the Cholas and the Song dynasty of China. However, one unresolved issue is that who were the marines or naval infantry troops that made possible the Chola conquest of Srivijaya? Historians have made no mention of troop composition of maritime expeditions of Cholas and their conquest of Maldives, some islands in Andaman and Nicobar island chains, and other regions of Southeast Asia of the Srivijaya kingdom. I have similarly failed to find any satisfactory source so far. In my discussion with some knowledgeable officers hailing from South India, some say that employment of Brahmin troops is out of the question. They hypothesize that possibly the coastal fishermen community were the Marines who did the fighting on landing. If this be the case, then assuming the Chola army as temporary or paramilitary or militia model is in doubt. Beach landing and fighting is serious business, demanding high degree of professional competence and training. We leave this research puzzle aside and now focus on the heterogeneous mix. We want to recover lost tradition from South India. S.N. Prasad, the historian, had observed, I quote, military history of South India remains unexplored, unquote. But surely there is a paradox. While all manuscripts that help scholars reconstruct the text of the Arthashastra were found and lay in South India, not much reference from the text emerged on the military academies. If the Arthashastra could be fixed and reconstructed nearly 100 years ago, there is a possibility that if more search for archives is done in South India, the rediscovery of literature related to Ghatikas, Salais, and Kardigai is possible. The area is ripe for a rigorous scholarly work. There may also be a possibility that all issues of military matters may not be in the Arthashastra, though overlap may exist with other texts like the Kurals. According to Vishnu Puran, there are 4 disciplines of Ayurveda, Dhanurveda, Sangeetveda, and Arthashastra. Now, Dhanurveda and Arthashastra are treated separately, and it is possible that in South India, Dhanurveda may have been the one which was included in the syllabus. Of course, the weapon system and technology was then based on the 4 systems of infantry, chariots, elephants, and cavalry. What is important is to research on non-material factors and how strategic, operational, and tactical matters were addressed. Now I focus on the Arthashastra and the core aspects of employment of troops. This is the second aspect. Knowing the troops, 2.33.8, the superintendent of foot soldiers as the head of department under his duty has Sutra 8. Thus, quote, he should be conversant with the strength or weakness of hereditary, hired, banded, allied, alien, forest troops with military operations in water or on high ground with open or tactical fighting in trenches or in open by day or by night, and with employment or absence of employment of foot soldiers in different types of work. Troops and also regiments have peculiar characteristics. This is even applicable today, as it was in ancient times. While a common military training makes a soldier a common resource and a national symbol of a democratic professional army, it is vital also to be conversant with unique troop characteristics of troops hailing from various parts of India. It could be said today that, I quote, just as some troops in peace are gifted players of hockey or long-distance runners, likewise for war, good regimental officers need to know the natural tendency of troops and reinforce them, at the same time make efforts to overcome any negative attributes by training and leadership for war. The knowledge of strengths and weaknesses is a professional challenge. In his autobiography, a former chief of the army staff, General Krishna Rao, learnt on joining his regiment that the Mahars were aboriginal inhabitants of western and central India who had served with distinction in Shivaji's army and later in Bombay native infantry of British India. While the caste handbooks of the Indian army produced by the British were meant to serve their recruiting purpose basing on a specious martial race theory and colonial anthropology, the handbook clearly demonstrates that the need for a deep understanding of troops is vital. We may and must reject the work of imperial power, but cannot have shortcuts to understanding troops. A good example is that of the Gurkhas. Newly commissioned officers in some good units visit and tour the recruiting regions, including Nepal, and continue this tradition till beyond their retirement. Likewise, it is incumbent for officers to speak the language of the troops over and above Hindustani. Being a multilingual country, as India was in the past during the time of Kautilya, this seems very natural. The point is that officers must know their troops better than mothers knowing their children. A new challenge which the Indian military is dealing with is the employment of foreign troops in UN peacekeeping missions. Zaman had made a mention of that. A number of Indian military officers have or are leading these missions. A good grasp and knowledge of troop characteristics of nations and foreign troops is a professional necessity. Troops also include those of neighboring countries who may be performing the duties under command. In my interacting with a number of officers, they find no problem whatsoever in understanding and appreciating troops from Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh in the peacekeeping missions. This should not surprise Kautilya, as all countries encompass the Indian subcontinent of the Kautilya's Arthashastra. Now I come to the employment of troops from the text. 9.2112. The type of troops to be mobilized is to depend on the season and terrain, as well as on the type of troops the enemy is likely to employ in the fight. Troops to be mobilized must be such as would easily overcome the enemy's resistance, unquote. Ideal is to use hereditary troops. Some scenarios for hired troops is given to include shortage of regular troops when enemy is weak, when diplomacy is to be strategy, and in short skirmishes, hired troops are recommended. Mercenaries are best employed when opposing troops are also bands. Similar scenarios are given for allied troops, the alien troops, and the forest troops. In 9.22.1-24, Kautilya argues that the forest tribes are best commanded by Aryans. He means to say that in the context of his time, the leadership was of Aryans, and they were the best commanders, though others could also serve in the army. In Sutra 21-24, he provides the essence of military labor market. Sutra 21, I quote, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra troops, each earlier one is better for equipping for war than each later one, on account of superiority of spirit, says the teacher. Para 22. No, says Kautilya in his characteristic way, now picked up by Karl Popper. Sutra 23 states that by prostrating an enemy may win over a Brahman troop. Sutra 24, a Kshatriya army trained in the art of weapon is better, or a Vaishya or a Shudra army when possessed of great strength. Kautilya, if at all he was a Brahman, himself was not sparing to the Brahmins and had warned by challenging the received wisdom of the teachers by pointing out and explaining as to why Brahman troops those days may not have made good soldiers. This secular work of Kautilya, the materialist, also demolishes the wrong idea in the understanding of the stereotypical Varna system, which is that only Kshatriyas in the ancient past and the so-called martial races in the colonial time had the divine right to be soldiers. Forest troops. A further study of text reveals that the wild streak and autonomous behavior of forest troops is also used as an advantage in combat. I give 5 examples. A. To take up defensive position on the frontier. Book 2.1.5. In the section Settlement of Countryside, the text guides how to deploy troops like our present-day home and hearth units of local troops in specific regions. In Sutra 5, it is stated, quote, on the frontier, he should erect the fortress of frontier chiefs as gates of the country under command frontier chiefs. This is sensible option. Otherwise, troops of other regions may have to be deployed. This avoids logistical and financial problem with the deployment of regular troops. In the next Sutra 6, the method of covering the gap in defense, it says, quote, trappers, sabaras, palunda, chandala, forest dwellers should guard the intervening regions between them, unquote. In other words, as is today, gaps in between defenses are to be aggressively dominated by these unique troops. Second example, troops in advance guard. In Yana, that is an advance in a campaign or a military expedition, Kamandaka's Nitisara has further improved upon Kautilya's Arthashastra. Kamandaka's Nitisara suggests that troops such as Adibala, that is enemy troops now fighting on behalf of the king, should always be kept engaged with difficult assignments, lest they become a source of danger to the state. In Sarga, Canton 19, Parakarana, section 28, verse 23, 19.28-23 of Kamandaka, on forest troop it says, thus I quote, the foresters, that is Atvika, Bala, should also be employed in similar task of weeding out thorns, Kantaka Shodhana, in the fortified areas of enemy dominion. While entering the enemy territory, they are placed in the forefront of by a vice Vijigyusu. That means they are the advance guard. The foresters are the advance guard. Third example, use of forest troops when weak in energy, 7.14.27. Section 118, recouping of power that have become weak. If weak in energy, he should secure the services as they may be available of heroic men from bands, robber bands, foresters and Malech tribes, and of secret agents capable of doing harm to the enemies. Unquote. It is clear that in recovery of power, Kautilya suggests the use of forest troops. D. Fourth example, mobile battle. Forest troops in drawing enemy by ruse to ambush or destroy him. 10.3.4. Various types of covert fighting in Sutra 4, it is stated, of feigning a rout with treasonable alien and foreign troop, he should strike the pursuing enemy when he has reached unsuitable ground. Unquote. That means the forest troops are as a bait because they've carried that reputation, but he has trained them hard. Last, this ferocious reputation of forest troops is used as an advantage. 10.6.48 to 50 provides method to strike terror, and the Sutra 50 of which about a false report akin to a psychological warfare are planted like a forest chieftain has risen in revolt. This scares the hell out of the enemy. Just saying that those guys have revolted. So now I turn to the situation at present. Situation today. Now two things stand out. First is that the society today has become even more multilingual, multicultural, multi-ethnic and multi-religious. Appendix of my paper gives that just the Armored Corps has 19 fixed or one-class units and 39 all-India mixed units. The infantry has 22 types of regiments consisting of a number of units or battalions mirroring democratic India today. I also include the unique case of Assam and Madras regiment in my paper as an appendix. The second is that what was mentioned in the text seems to be applicable even today as it relates to morale and some non-material issues. Now I turn back to point one, learning troops in multi-ethnic society as in India then and now. As a counterfactual, had General Krishna Rao not joined the famous Mahar regiment on commissioning, his knowledge of the origin of the troops could have come much later in his military career and life. In my own case, having served with all classes of Sikh troops, I came to know and understand that the Adi Granth, the primary scripture of the Sikhs, contains the work of the first 5 and the 9th Gurus. 4 bards, that is, Satta, Balwand, Sundar and Mardana, 11 Bhatts, that is, eologists associated with Sikh court, and 15 Bhagats. Bhagats are devotees such as Kabir, Namdev, Ravidas, Sheikh Farid and other medieval poets of Sant, Sufi and Bhakti origin. It must be appreciated and realized that the current regimental system at least makes military officers aware of the types of troops that they command. This sort of education is not imparted in any university in India, but is learned on job. It has been my experience that young officers soon reflect the character of the troops they command and live with. I have seen that officers hailing from various parts of India become more like the Gurkhas or Sikhs or South Indians with the regimental family life and acculturation. And then they acquire the good traits of the troops in the unprecedented disaster that struck the areas of sons of soil. I am certain that those officers from all India civil service or police, on being allocated a cadre of a state, likewise develop a lifelong love and respect for the people of the state they serve till they become inspectors and directors generals or chief secretaries. The wars fought after independence also demonstrate the variety of troops are employed. As mentioned, units are one class, fixed class, mixed units in the arms. There are also territorial army units, home and hearth battalions, paramilitary forces like the units of the central police organizations under command of the army in defended sectors like the Border Security Force or the Indo-Tibetan Border Police on the borders with Tibet. Also in practice is the use of foreign troops, such as the Gurkhas from Nepal, much like the troops of Kerala serving in ancient Sri Lankan army. Joint operations with Mukti Bani in liberation of Bangladesh in 1971 is another example of Adi Mitrabala, that is enemy troops, changing into Mitrabala, that is troops of an ally, as Mukti Jodhas. In counterinsurgency and internal security experience, the example of Nagas fits in the text. In India, surrendered Naga insurgents were also absorbed in the Indian army as soldiers in the border security force. In using Kautilyan vocabulary further, it could be said that the Nagas were the restive forest tribes who were then made hereditary as a Maulabala of the Indian army. Although the Naga troops are professionally trained and competent to be employed anywhere, one good example being Operation Vijay in Kargil in 1999, those police officers who have experience in jungle terrain and counter-insurgency in Nakshal areas of forested central India report that the best constables are the Nagas, as they have a natural tendency to perform better in jungle warfare. It shows that nurture or training cannot cancel nature, and this natural advantage needs to be used intelligently. It shows that Kautilya's suggestion on placing of the best and weak troops in conduct of battle are nuanced, such that in 10.5, 41 to 52. Allocation of troops to tasks cannot be a mechanical or a computer-generated exercise. Human interface is important. While no unit will ever admit that they are not the very best in any operation of war in any terrain, the reality is that there are nuances when employing troops to task. Good generals need not be told this. In 1999 at Kargil, when the intrusion of Pakistani troops was detected in high altitude, it was the Ladakh Scouts or the Special Frontier Force that led the first ascent. They being from high altitude region and thus were natural mountaineers. Another example of unnecessary casualties was the use of Gurkha troops who belong to a landlocked area and are not natural swimmers to undertake and commemorate a token amphibious landing of the type done in Second World War by Indian generals at the fag end of the victorious campaign to liberate Bangladesh in 1971. Examples from the other armies. Machiavelli in Prince mentions mercenaries and private military organizations, basing it on his experience of the fragmented Italy comprising of city-states. He calls mercenaries and auxiliaries as useless and dangerous. In wars of 21st century, private security firms and contractors, as those of the US in the Middle East and Afghanistan, are a force by themselves, and here probably Machiavelli's understanding may have some relevance to current wars of occupation, which is worth a research. Private security firms may have led to more problems combined with the CIA formation executing drone operations. Now, case of Afghanistan. Kautilyan and Chola army composition also throws light on the Afghan National Army. I'll call it ANA. ANA is now being raised, equipped and trained to provide internal and external security after US and NATO forces pull out by the end of 2014. This is going to be the largest standing army ever fielded by Afghanistan. To pay the Maula Bala, there is need of treasury or kosha. The finance part may only be foreign aid. This itself makes the prakrit of the Bala under a calamity or a vyasana, which is implicitly not sustainable. What is apparent that the text of Kautilya's Arthashastra provides a framework. It suggested the right mix of what the army ought to be like, seeing the political economy and politics. A similar exercise is being done for the case of Afghanistan at the national and international level. What I only demonstrate is that ancient texts could dwell so deeply on the people, military labor market and composition of the army. Policymakers for ANA can learn both from Kautilya's Arthashastra and see how a modern Indian army has been formed and institutionalized. Europe. Today in Europe, barring Switzerland, there is no conscription and all militaries are professional volunteer armies. The character of war having changed in a major part of Western Europe, conquest of territory are now things of the past. The EU, without the need of wars or danda, is one whole Chakravartra Kshetra, without any Vijigusi in the military sense. As a result, for the EU, bereft of an international or European Matsya Nyaya, and therefore without the need for a mandala theory, these changes appear welcome and logical to a limited extent. The explanation for this being limited is because EU has not foreclosed any defense and security policy of hard military power, including the shining example of NATO. In the case of India and its neighborhood, it may be impractical to apply or transpose thus the EU model today. India has to have adequate and dissuasive military force and power to deal with protection of its sovereignty with its disputed borders with Pakistan and China. Thus, in the Indian context, there may not be a need to imitate the European models. Of course, special forces, army, cyber war, etc. are different. Second aspect is the morale of the army. The second non-material matter in relating to issues today from book 6 of Arthashastra is about morale and some non-material issues. Kautilya counsels the necessity to take precautions against disasters before one can start on an expedition or a conquest. In 6.5, 1 to 21, quote, the group of calamities of the army, unquote, 33 are listed in the first sutra. Most of the calamities, barring items 1 to 3, are operational matters of combat. Items of relevance are, first, the state of being unhonored, 2, dishonored, 3, unpaid. Further, in issues of morale, Sutra 2 suggests, among these, as between an unhonored and a dishonored army, the unhonored would fight when honored with money, not the dishonored, with resentment with his heart. Later, a precaution, Sutra 21, is given, and that is, the king, ever diligent, should take steps right beforehand against the cause because of which he might suffer a calamity of the constituents of the army. While the Kautilya's Arthashastra may provide no clear-cut solution to the dynamic equation of civil-military relations, it only provides good pointers to the morale and motivation, and at no time the military should be seen to be unhonored and dishonored. The text does show remarkably how, in ancient texts in India, so many issues were thought through. Interestingly, Kautilya's Arthashastra could be a precursor to the Western literature on CMR, such as S.P. Huntington's The Soldier and the State. Though meant for America, the book has often been taken as a universal yardstick in literature. Likewise, the literature of a fear of a possession of a military takeover or a coup in independent India often gives the example of Pakistan military undertaking regular coups starting from the 1950s, whereas the subconscious roots of the fear may lie elsewhere. The one fact that Mauryan Empire, which may not be in current public imagination, may be a historic fear of military coup. According to the Puranas, in 187 BC, the Mauryan Empire collapsed when the last ruler, Brihadratha, was overthrown and assassinated by his military commander, Senapati Pushyamitra Sungada Brahman, who then founded the Sunga dynasty, which ruled for over a century. Conclusion. Using text and then relating it to the context, as in the past and today, it becomes clear that the codification and option exist in the sutras which spread across the books of the Arthashastra. Matters concerning the composition of the army, employment of troops to task, and gradation of types of troops in a hierarchy exist in the text. When studied critically, it seems that they are, generally speaking, applicable even today. It is clear that more multidisciplinary work with interpretation and commentaries is now required to update this Smriti literature. The literature from South India further gives some clue to fundamental differences in the composition of the army and the pecking order. From a further study of text and then relating them to battle accounts, it will be possible to give a more authentic picture. However, in the reality of Indian tradition and ethos, unlike Greek accounts of Thucydides or ancient Chinese accounts, archival record keeping is not minute or thorough. While this could be a cultural trait, the challenge lies in reconstructing war histories and then relating it to the text. The paper was one preliminary attempt. Thank you.